Hello, and welcome back to the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm your host, Robin Hunicke, here today to talk with Arvi Teikari about indie game development, game jams, tools for creation, and the creativity that comes from just making games from passion alone. Really fantastic conversation in which we talk about how Arvi got started and how the game jam community scaffolded some of the game designs that he worked on, including his fantastic game, Baba Is You. Thanks for joining us. Here we are.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
And I am here during COVID times, interviewing developers through the magic of the internet to continue working on our series, which with me generally focuses on independent creators and people who are pushing the bounds of game design. And I am thrilled today to be speaking with Arvi Teikari, who is actually a Finnish game developer responsible for the most amazing game of all time, Baba Is You. And so we're going to be speaking with Arvi today about the process of developing games and whatever else comes to mind. So Arvi, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I guess I should start off by saying that we met initially when you started to show Baba Is You at Experimental Gameplay Workshop. That was how we initially came into contact. And of course, I fell in love with game immediately. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this game and yourself?
Yeah, sure. Usually when I give like a talk or presentation about Baba Is You, I start by introducing myself, but I guess I'll follow your...
Yeah, you can do it that way too. Let's go with you and then the game. Let's do it.
Okay. It's just feels more natural because kind of Baba Is You is a result of what has happened to me during this life of mine. But yeah, so I'm a Finnish game developer based in Helsinki, Finland. I've been making games for soon 20 years, I think, although obviously mostly as a hobby. I got started when I was a kid in kindergarten. Many of my friends, me included, had like older siblings who played video games during that time when like Nintendo 64 and Super Nintendo were big things. And I remember that in kindergarten, all the kids wanted to draw their own games on paper and let like friends play them by showing with their fingers, like I'm moving here, I do this. And if you were friends with someone, they always beat your levels. If you didn't like someone, they always died in your levels and so on. And my cousin had a Super Nintendo. I played Super Mario World on that, and it left a big impression. So I had like this interest in video games from a very, very early stage. And then in primary school, a schoolmate introduced me to game creation tools, these programs that don't necessarily require like programming knowledge, that are more like visual, Game Maker in this case. And that was finally the kind of, oh yes, now I can actually make games without knowing how to program.
And, it can be me.
Yeah, that like it was fantastic because like I was a Finnish primary schooler. I had a very low attention span during that time. Like trying to make games with actual programming at that time would have been totally impossible. And actually, when we started making games with the Game Maker, I pretty quickly ran into the same problem. Like Game Maker has this scripting language, the GML, that you need to know to do anything more advanced, like for example, platformers or something. And it turned out that not understanding English, not having the patience to learn that scripting language was all, again, very limiting. So I moved to other programs pretty quickly. And so we had this small group of people making games in primary school, but all the other people eventually lost interest. I didn't. And I kept making games as a hobby, and it kind of became this, like, my biggest hobby over the years, and eventually turned into a career, which led into my two commercial titles, Environmental Station Alpha and now Baba Is You.
Did you have
And
friends at that time did anyone stick around? Did you have anyone in your circle immediately, or were you then sort of connected to an online community when you were at that age? What was that like?
yeah, basically it was I. Well, it's hard to say, like, talk about school grades and stuff when translating from Finnish to English, because obviously things change. I think I usually translate this yläaste in the Finnish concept to upper secondary in English schools, but I don't think it's a perfect match. But I think by the time of this, so to say, upper secondary, I was pretty much the only person in this group of schoolmates who was still like very interested in making games. I know that some people still made some stuff, but I was kind of obsessed on a deeper level with that. I might be wrong. I might be misremembering at this point, but definitely by high. Sorry,
you did it out of passion. You didn't really have a community. You were kind of going off on your own in that case.
Yeah, there were some like this program I moved to from Game Maker called the Games Factory and later Multimedia Fusion were made by the same company or a company called Click Team, a French company, I think, which had it was kind of the first company to make these non-programming required. Actually, their programs don't require any programming knowledge at all. They're like fully visual, which was perfect for me as a primary schooler. And they started with the program Click and Play in 1994. And because they were kind of first on the market and because their programs were so easy to use in comparison to basically anything else, and because they were kind of more advanced at a certain point in time, there were several communities built around their programs specifically, which were actually very kind of insular and kind of hostile towards any other game creation tools. And kind of when I learned English enough to be able to at least theoretically hang around on an internet forum, I immediately moved on to, there was, for example, a site called The Daily Click, which was based around these Click Team tools. And that was kind of where I formed my first game developer friendships on some level outside of these schoolmates.
That's cool. It's really, I mean, what's so fascinating to me, just even at this very early stage of hearing about your career, is that you are the result of democratized tools that reach kids at an early age. And then it was so juicy to you, the idea of being a game developer, that you stuck with it despite, what would be being sort of an independent person in your own community, and then found your own community, which is it's very inspiring. To have to learn another language to do that on top of it marks you as a game designer, right? Because I feel like the field tends to find us, and then once it's found us, we tend to just follow along. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of like well, to be honest, like doing this had a lot of perks because obviously I learned a lot of English by doing this, and I've been like knowing English has been very useful in many ways elsewhere as well. But it's kind of, and also I feel that English for me as a kid had that kind of cool sound to it, like being able to say things in English and especially being able to name things in English had this kind of coolness
power
to it, which also like kind of the same way that I feel that many people find naming things in Japanese has this kind of it sounds cool, it sounds more mysterious, or I don't know, like there's this, like when you don't know a language very well, it sounds more interesting. And I remember that when I played the game F-Zero on Super Nintendo as a kid, there was this green I don't know, space race car, whatever they are. Those called Wild Goose, and I didn't know that what a Wild Goose was. For me, it was like, oh, it's like a techno monster or something. I don't know. And I found the name super cool, and I was really disappointed when I finally kind of translated it to Finnish, and it was like, oh, Villihanhi. That's like so mundane.
And yet the subject of a very, very popular game. So, you never know when gooses are
Yeah,
going to turn out to be something spectacular. It's very funny. Okay, so you're working on this game kind of platform and you're creating games, and then where does that take you out of secondary school?
yeah. So uh, especially in high school, I started forming maybe a bit more kind of long-lasting game developer connections. Like those, for example, this Daily Click site was definitely more of a like random jumble of people from everywhere showcasing their stuff, and I didn't really participate that much in the deepest parts of the community. I did join. I chatted with people. I made games. I participated in discussions, but not like a super huge amount. And in high school, I started being more aware of other sites outside of these click communities, as they were called. For example, the independent games source, TIG source, as it was called. And for me, TIG source was kind of the larger, more mature community to move on to. That I think it was like 2009 or 2008 when I started moving over to there. And there, and in the community surrounding TIG source, I kind of made my first, or at least my second or third, kind of more proper, so to say, social connections to indie developers. And during those times, I got introduced to the concept of game jams, this kind of gathering together with people and making games with like a time limit, following a theme usually. And that kind of interested me a lot. I don't remember exactly why I was super interested in that concept. I remember that Ludum Dare, this online game jam that has been going for like over a decade now, well over a decade, I think like 15 years now, was the first time I ever participated at a game jam. I guess it might be because these game creation tools that don't require programming are especially good at like quick prototyping. My first games were made in like, or my first games that I put online for people to play were often made in like 2 weeks or something. I just made something, put it out, didn't really care, maybe fixed like the worst bugs, but I was happy with them even though they were like terrible in many ways.
Yeah. It's funny
and
because,
game jams,
go ahead.
Sorry. Just kind of game jams support this kind of approach.
Yeah, I was going to say, so when I first started working with the people that founded the first game jam, one of the things that we were really trying to do was to create a sense of the freedom to iterate, because back then the tools were exactly the opposite, right? Like if you wanted to write a game, you had to write the whole engine, and it was really difficult. And so the very first game jams started out with us building an engine and sharing it with a bunch of people, giving them some time to become familiar with it, and then just saying, make anything with this little weird engine that we made. And so it's so fascinating that like within 10 years of that process happening, there were tools and organizations around those tools that were doing that practice as the foundation of developing games. And it's just really inspiring to know that those initial ideas of iterating and trying new things ended up influencing a game like yours, which is so innovative. So that's just a cool thing.
Yeah, I remember that, for example, in this Ludum Dare community, Unity was only kind of starting to become a thing. So for many people, making a game for a jam like 10 years ago was still quite a lot of work. And I remember that there was some discussion that maybe programs like Multimedia Fusion, the one I was using, I'm still using, should be banned because it makes things a little bit too easy, or like skews the balance. Balance a bit too much, because I can understand the reasoning. Like those programs do a lot for you in comparison to someone who is using like Python and has to do way more like framework around the game before they can even start. I guess nowadays the situation might be different for even Python users, and I'm pretty sure it is. But at that time, I could see the reasoning, but obviously because I was using Multimedia Fusion myself, I wouldn't have liked the idea. But yeah, it was kind of when I moved from like Ludum Dare to physical game jams, that was kind of when I started finally actually meeting in real life these future game developer friends and stuff, and that was a very big point for me with becoming a serious game developer, and I'm still friends with many of those people.
Yeah, those transitions are sort of facilitated by both the groups and then eventually the gatherings. Did you do in-person game jams that had like an in particular impact on you, or were you mostly doing these through the network?
Yeah, there were 2 game jams that I kind of because my first time traveling alone in a foreign country was to go to my first game jam in Skövde, Sweden, to a game jam called No More Sweden. The name sounds kind of scary, but
It does.
but it's I think the idea behind the name is that someone made a joke, like someone made a joke when traveling with Swedish game developers to a game jam, that if this train we are in right now would crash, then there would be no more Swedish game developers. I don't remember the exact story, but the kind of idea behind the name of the game jam came from that. Like it's such a tight-knit small group of people who form the whole of the Swedish indie game developer community.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, we got to watch out when we travel in packs. So you were so motivated by games that you learned a new language, and then you traveled outside of your country by yourself to hang out with other game developers and make games, which is amazing. And what was it like when you finally got to this jam and met all these people in person? Did it feel like, I mean, I remember my first GDC and feeling like, wow, they're real. Like I didn't just imagine these people. Is that what it was like for you?
Yeah, I think there was definitely, for example, a lot of kind of fanboyism where I was meeting these kind of, in some sense, heroes of mine, like people whose games I had played, who had made some really cool, inspiring stuff that I had enjoyed a lot. For example, Petri Purho, who made the Seamus McNally award-winning Crayon Physics Deluxe, was at the first game jam I went into. And actually, because Petri is also...
I love Petri. I love him so much. He's amazing.
Yeah, Petri is a great person. And Petri is also, because Petri is a Finnish developer, Petri was there in this first No More Sweden I went into, also as a kind of a person that I know who is older than me and knows how things work, and is also Finnish. So if I run into like trouble, then they are like the person I can ask for
like
help
a big
with.
brother. Yeah.
Kind of in that sense. I feel that my first game jam experiences were maybe not quite as exciting as they could have been. I remember that at least the games I made were kind of not very good, but they were still very fascinating experiences. And especially when I went to my first Nordic Game Jam, which is, I think, still the largest annual game jam in the world, organized in Copenhagen.
Huge. Yeah, it's amazing. Huge. Big warehouse, tons of people.
Yeah, and it was, I think, effort. Yeah, like I think this No More Sweden was for me very important in that I got to know these people, and I got to get like comfortable with the atmosphere and the sense of game jams, like physical game jams. But I think it might have been not until at Nordic Game Jam that I kind of finally felt comfortable with the whole thing and kind of knew what I was doing and found my place in this big picture of game jams. And yeah, Baba Is You was made at Nordic Game Jam, so that's maybe speaks for itself in some way.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how you got to the game idea and what it means to you as a developer.
Yeah, I guess I've been like discussing my past for 20 minutes now, so sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's really good because we don't get people, honestly, like, the games industry is just learning to embrace younger people who have come up through these tool sets. And I think that you're probably the first person we've interviewed that's spoken explicitly to the experience of getting hooked on developing games with WYSIWYG tools and then those becoming a bridge. So I actually think it's really fascinating. And I think especially for people that are interested in Roblox, Minecraft, and other tool sets that are coming up now, like the stuff that's being developed in Hypixel, like that these are really these are really interesting times. So I think you can be an inspiration to the next generation of developers, because you did it when what they considered to be normal was still extremely advanced. So I like it. So let's talk about that first game jam and what brought the idea of Baba into your head.
Yeah. So I was in 2017. I was at Nordic Game Jam in Copenhagen, and I had actually planned, because at that point the whole Game Jam thing was very familiar to me, and I had a lot of friends over there. I had kind of planned to maybe work on my existing game projects and maybe not even really participate in the Game Jam. Like, I was nominally part of the Game Jam, but I didn't really feel that I probably would have the energy to really make anything serious. But then the theme was announced, and the theme was not there. Nordic Game Jam doesn't require you to pay. Like, you can make stuff that follows the theme very vaguely. You are not really forced to like stick to the theme very strongly or strictly. And I had been playing some puzzle games, specifically block pushing puzzle games such as Stephen Sausage Roll and Snakebird, and A Good Snowman is Hard to Build. I think A Good Snowman is Hard to Build.
Yeah, those are all great games.
They're really great. And I think A Good Snowman is Hard to Build was the latest puzzle game I had played at that point, or maybe Cosmic Express from the same developer. And I had been wanting to make puzzle games for a long time, and there were some design problems that I kept running into when trying to make those time and time again. Just kind of obstacles that I hadn't realized how to overcome. And when I heard this not there theme, I started thinking, for some reason that I cannot remember anymore, of this kind of word not. It just made me think about how in logic you can have some concept X, or like happy, and you can reverse the meaning of that concept by saying not X or not happy. And it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And through a process that is completely lost to me at this point, 3 years later, I kind of this block pushing game, inspiration from those, inspiration from some other games I had played, and this logic concept combined in my head to form this mental image of a game that is a block pushing game where you have blocks of ice and then a pool of lava, and the lava is obviously hot. The blocks of ice, well, they are made of ice, and when the ice comes in contact with the lava, or even comes close to the lava, the ice melts. But you are able to state ice is not melt to prevent that. I'm really sad that I can't remember like the very first steps of that thought process that led to this concept. But that is like earliest I can remember, that I have this ice, I have this lava.
Yeah, it's often a mush, right? Like, it's not something that, it's more like maybe a feeling or a series of connections that happens so fast, and then before you realize you're spacing out about it, you're spacing out about the idea, and then at some point you have the cognitive capacity to recognize that the idea is a concrete idea, but the beginning of it is always kind of it's like, almost like, I think of it as like kind of like smelling a flower from far away. Like, you can smell it and you're like, oh, that's a nice smell, and then at some point you realize there's a rose bush coming up on the street, and then you stop and you smell the rose, and then you go, oh yes, this is a beautiful rose. But like, up until the point when you actually come out of your reverie, wherever you are, it's in the ether, right?
Yeah, and also I feel that even though I keep a diary, it would require some like extraordinary egoism on my part to kind of keep track of my thoughts on such a level that I like would have written down my thought process at that point when I didn't really realize yet that the idea would be any good.
Okay, so you had this idea, and then did you just like drive? Did you immediately drive to it? Did you talk to someone about it? What was your process?
Yeah, I kind of toyed with this concept. It seemed interesting on some level. Like, it definitely stuck in my head that, hey, yeah, I could use like words to change what this ICE is, like this logic knot thing. But my initial impression of this idea, what I usually do when I get an idea is that I kind of think about it. I toss it around in my head and see what I can, like, does it seem exciting? And this idea, to be honest, didn't seem exciting to me. It seemed interesting, but it seemed boring in some ways. It
Like
seemed
dry?
like something. Sorry?
Like dry?
Yeah, like both a dry and also something that it's kind of, it had this smell of a puzzle idea that wouldn't lend itself very well to actual puzzles. Also, it seemed like an idea that would be very difficult to implement. Like I was afraid that I would run into
Logic
programming
problems.
issues.
Yeah.
So I kind of I didn't feel very, very confident about it. But the nice thing about both these game creation tools, Multimedia Fusion that I was still using at the time, and I'm still using at this time, and game jams in general, is that the whole idea is that you can take a prototype you have in your head, or whatever idea you have in your head, and try to make something about it, around it. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You can toss it away after the game jam. You are not like committed to the idea for longer than what the game jam takes. And
Yeah,
sometimes not even.
There's no publisher saying, where is it? Or threatening
Yeah,
to
yeah,
pay you.
exactly. And even like sometimes you are not even like bound to the idea, even for the full duration of the game jam. Like I remember in 2009, I think, or 2008, I made a game in one day for this Ludum Dare game jam, which is a 2-day game jam. I made like a frog, Cave Frog was the name of the game. And I was really, I wasn't happy with the game. And then the next day I took a walk. I had a inspiration and I decided, okay, I'll make a second game. And my actual submission was the second game. And I was really way more happy with that. So sometimes you can even change plans during the game jam.
Yeah.
So I decided that, okay, this idea doesn't seem like it has much potential, or maybe it has potential, but it seems boring. But I'll prototype it anyway. And I started prototyping it. And I just, from then I had kind of a sense of what I need to do. I knew that I need to make a top-down perspective, grid-based block pushing engine. And I knew that I need to do a system where words can form sentences and those sentences can have meaning. And that's where I started. And during the game jam, as I got further, I kind of adjusted the idea in various ways. And the one of the kind of explicit things I remember from then was that a game developer friend, Tim Garbos, who has, for example, made the game What the Golf, which has been winning awards here and there. It's a very amusing game. Tim Garbos walked behind me and started watching me work on Baba Is You. It didn't have a name at that point, I think. And Tim felt that I think Tim was drinking a beer and felt that, oh, that looks cool, and walked away, and later came back with another person, like a mutual friend, and was like, hey, this thing Arvi was making looks cool.
Looks neat. Yeah,
looks neat. Like, check it out. I think actually at that point the game was crashing. I had a bug that I had to solve, so Tim had to retreat for a moment with said friend. But they came back later and checked it out. So I was kind of, during the game jam, I started getting a sense that people were interested in the idea, and then it ended up winning the game jam.
Right? Yeah,
it was definitely a motivator. Yeah.
This is the thing, right? Like, so often an idea can feel interesting, but you can work on it for years and years and years in your head and not show it to people. And some people do that out of a fear that their game ideas will get stolen. Some people do it out of just a fear of sharing. It's hard to put your art out there. But the game jam format allows you this kind of casual, like you said, non-committal commitment, right? You can work on something and you get the feedback from your community. And it's because it's not a competition necessarily, in the sense that not everybody goes trying to win the game jam usually. There's a more relaxed attitude towards seeing the spark, I guess would be what I would call it. Would you agree?
Yeah, like Nordic Game Jam is for me, it's a more relaxed game jam. I don't really approach, or I do approach Nordic Game Jam in the sense that, yeah, there's going to be a winner. I would like to make something that people like, but it's still very laid back. For the most part, I don't feel super bad about making something that doesn't really win anything.
Yeah.
But I think it's still maybe in the more competitive end of things. Like, I know that there usually every year there are some teams of people who approach it in a much more serious manner, who actually kind of try to make something that wins the game jam. So it's maybe like, I've definitely been at game jams that are more experimentally driven than Nordic Game Jam. But for me, Nordic Game Jam kind of hits a good balance between kind of wanting to do something serious, but also
just hanging out,
hanging around. Yeah. But it's definitely nice that. No, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, never mind.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
So you're there and you win the game jam, and then at that point, did you think like, okay, now I mean, because if you look at games like this, if everything from Daniel Ben-Mergi's work to I mean, there are so many games in this category of like what I would call intellectual puzzle games with logic threads, or language-based threads. When you look at these games and you think about how they work, there are kind of two paths for them. The one path is the developer has a very, very furious and intense period of development on it and is able to generate a lot of really cool puzzles right away. And then the other is that there's a little bit of a blip, and then there's a long cold period where it's very difficult to come up with puzzles that really work for the system. And then either you make it out on the other side or you don't. And so like Petri's games, for example, and a lot of the games in this category, you could even look at really experimental games like Mew Cartographer and stuff. They end up in these weird places where they may or may not be something that is commercial, but they are fascinating to the developer. So what was it like for you after the game jam, but before the game was done?
Yeah, actually, that maybe relates slightly to what I was thinking of saying. Like, one thing nice about or interesting about game jams is that sometimes when you mention that you can have an idea that you can try out and see, like that you feel is cool but are afraid to show people. Sometimes a game jam can be also useful in that you tried out this concept you have in your head and notice that, okay, this doesn't work. And like a variety of that is that you make something at the game jam and it works at the game jam. And then you can kind of maybe spend time prototyping that concept for a more full release, like a non-game jam version, and then realize that, okay, maybe this concept is so self-contained, so small, so something that it maybe doesn't support like a 20-hour commercial title. Maybe it's best to leave it either as a game jam version or maybe like a slightly more polished but still a very kind of bite-sized thing. And with Baba Is You, when I won the game jam, I was still very unsure what to do with the game. But part of the reason was, I think, what I just said. I wasn't sure if the idea was something that I wasn't sure if it would make for very good puzzles. Like, it might. I felt that it might be that the game is cool to showcase when like as long as the game has something new to show. But as soon as I run out of interesting things to show with the game, like these basic amusing interactions, the game gets way less interesting. And it would be best to leave it as a game jam or a slightly more polished but a small thing. I was also conflicted because I felt that I could either make a sandboxy toy-like thing out of Baba Is You. I could make something where people can play around with the words, make a thing where the levels can be solved in multiple ways. None of the levels are very difficult, but they kind of encourage the player to experiment with the words and do funny stuff with the words. or I could take the game to a more serious puzzle game approach where the levels are maybe stricter in their requirements. They have more definitive goals. They limit your options more, but they kind of require you to realize stuff. And I felt that these two approaches were kind of incompatible because different kinds of players would be interested in one, but maybe not the other.
Yeah.
So I spent some other developers, because Baba Is You has this thing where you can change what is you, the player. There's this word you, which kind of changes what in the game world is conscious, like where is the consciousness of the player in the game world. And some other developers asked me if I had intentionally had this concept of like kind of maybe not like reincarnation, but like moving consciousnesses between entities in my head, like this philosophical concept. Yeah. And I hadn't. I just wanted to make a puzzle game, but it was very fascinating for me that people saw this thing in the game. So I was also conflicted. Maybe I should make a story-driven game. Maybe I should
with a mission,
incorporate
message.
Yeah, exactly. And I was conflicted about all of these things. But pretty quickly after the game jam, I think we went to eat in a restaurant with some indie developer friends afterwards. And I talked with some indie developer friends afterwards, and I considered it myself afterwards. And ultimately, I decided, okay, I like puzzle games. I like some very difficult puzzle games. Stephen Sausage Roll is a very difficult puzzle game, but I really liked Stephen Sausage Roll. Same for Snakebird. I want to make a puzzle game. If I tried to make a sandboxy toy-like thing, I probably would do a bad job of it because I'm not personally a player of those kinds of games.
Yeah, you made it for yourself.
Yeah, kind of. I to be honest, like when I started making a full game out of the prototype, I made a lot of decisions based on what would I feel most comfortable about personally. Like what is the approach where I will have the most fun making this game. And I'm happy I did. It could have backfired, but in this case it didn't, and it led for a more enjoyable development process.
Well, and this is the question that everyone has to ask. I mean, I think if you look at Stephen Lavell's games and Crepere, or you look at Michael Burrow, or even Petrie's games, and a lot of the games in this milieu that are about thinking about logic and time specifically, or the way that large systems interact, in order to have the I guess the chutzpah to push it through, to really do the logic and build out a system that doesn't have big holes in it, you really have to be passionate about playing it and getting that sense of delight from beating it, or from figuring it out, from tinkering with it. So it is I feel like there's something about the format itself of the puzzle game that encourages the designer to design the game that they would play, because you have to have that passion to get through it. You know, it's not an easy thing to make a system that is self-consistent and also reflected of your effort. And when you make changes, it says something back. It's very hard. It's kind of like building a musical instrument, or designing, a new feedback loop. Like it's a very difficult thing to do. And so when you decided to go double down on puzzle and get engaged with this, were there moments where you were like, oh, this game is going to be too hard, no one will like it? Or did you get consistent feedback that you were on the right track?
I was definitely at times very concerned about the game being in multiple ways like unappealing to the players, especially early on when I decided that, or especially before I decided, but also afterwards, that I will do like a minimalistic art style that I can do myself. I won't go for like 3D art. I will do the music and audio by myself. When I made those decisions, they were obviously contained uncertainty about like, am I doing a terrible mistake with this? With the puzzle design itself, yeah, I did consider like I want to make a puzzle game that is difficult because I enjoy those kinds of puzzle games. And when I was designing puzzles, I sometimes felt that, oh yeah, this is tricky in a way that I like. I'm happy about this puzzle because it's tricky. But I was also kind of worried that the game would be too tricky, that it would be too niche. I think puzzle games in general have kind of like a upwards battle in comparison to many other genres, because many other genres are not built around the concept of frustration and being stuck like puzzle games are. Like in puzzle games, that's a very big part of the thing.
Well, so this is an interesting question, actually. I think especially now, as we're dealing with spending a lot of time at home and having a lot of time on our hands and looking at the kind of games that we play. To me, it seems like puzzle games, it is about being stuck or being frustrated, but the skill that you develop, if you can play all the way through the witness, for example, and get all the way to the ending, is the notion of patience in the face of uncertainty or not knowing, right? Like that you can look at a system or a problem and you can absorb as many things as you want about it. And then at some point you put it away. And then your brain just kind of has a secondary mode. Everyone's brain has it, where it'll chew on a problem in the background. This is what sort of Einstein has always said, right? Like, I just go for a long walk and then somehow the theory of relativity pops up. This patience, this kind of the engagement with a system and then waiting to see if you can almost auto-generate something in the background. That's a really interesting human skill. Do you think that maybe given our current situation, puzzle games have something to teach us in that respect?
That is a very interesting question. I no one has ever asked me that. Maybe I wouldn't say that. Like I could imagine puzzle games being a tool for some people to kind of learn more about patience, but I feel that the skills that go into solving puzzle games and the kind of aha moments of considering a problem and then stepping away from it and getting an insight is it has definitely kind of real world counterparts. You used Einstein as an example. Like there are definitely places in real life where you spend time with a problem and cannot get anywhere, and then later get an insight when you're doing something completely different. But maybe being stuck inside due to lockdown lacks that kind of, you are not required to solve a problem except like how to not be bored and how to how not to go outside and join protests against lockdown.
Or perhaps I mean, one of the more basic problems is just how to live with yourself. Like if we're all so distracted and busy and doing so many things all the time, then when we're at home, we're doing our maintenance and our chores, or we're sleeping. And then suddenly to be with oneself all the time is I don't know. It is interesting. I think it presents some people some issues that go beyond the sort of the immediate necessities of life, and ask like, well, how do I entertain myself? I just find myself wondering like, maybe puzzle games will have a resurgence, as people get through crosswords and physical jigsaws. Maybe digital puzzle games will get a little bit more of people's time. It's an interesting idea to contemplate, if nothing else.
Yeah. I feel that like maybe I misunderstood slightly what you were pondering earlier, because I definitely agree that I could imagine that people could find new appreciation for certain kinds of puzzling during a time like this, where there's just like a lot of time to just think about things, and a lot of time to that you need to figure out something to do with. So yeah, I guess I agree with that. I was just kind of wondering if the kind of being on lockdown and handling the lockdown process, like what kind of similarities it could have to a puzzle solving experience. But yeah, in the way you described it just now, I do agree with what you said.
So do you feel like now that you made the game, and I mean, spoiler alert, it won a bunch of awards and it's done really well, and you've ported it and it's reaching more and more people. Do you feel like uh happy that people engaged with the system and have that patience with it? Because it is fantastic, right? The moment that you decide to do something with the words and then you get out of the puzzle situation and you just feel, I'm so clever. That feeling is really great. Like, were you genuinely surprised that it was as popular and well received as it was?
Uh, well, despite what I said earlier about having these concerns of the game being too difficult, I pretty early on started having quite a lot of confidence that the game would be at least moderately successful, because there were enough situations where people saw the game for the first time and found it amusing. Uh, I started sending test builds after the game jam very quickly to like game developer friends, and over the years, the game was submitted to the Independent Games Festival and was showcased during GDC, and it was in uh, um, at Nintendo's booth in Gamescom in 2018 and so on. So there were like several situations where I could get live feedback. Also, some people streamed the game jam version, and I could see that the like stream viewers were excited about the idea. So I did trust that the game would do well, and that the idea of the game was so interesting to people that even if the game turned out to be too difficult to for most, uh, they could still appreciate the concept and possibly check the game out. And actually, as a part of that, a game developer friend of mine, uh, Alan Hazelden, who has made the games like Cosmic Express and Good Snowman is Hard to Build, and is
Yeah.
actually releasing their game a Monsters Expedition to Human Exhibitions sometime soon. I don't remember the date. I recommend checking out the trailer. It looks really cool. They suggested, I think it was them who suggested, having a way for players to beat the game very early. So even if they don't really want to engage with like extremely difficult puzzles, if they don't like want to go all the way through the game, they can still have like a final puzzle they can
Yeah.
beat and feel that, okay, I did
Did it.
this. Yeah, and now I'm done with the game. I don't have to kind of give up. I can say that I beat the game. And if I don't want to play the super difficult puzzles and get overly frustrated, it doesn't matter. I've beaten
Yeah.
the game. And that was a very good suggestion that I did implement in Baba Is You. And I feel that I'm not sure if it actually worked, but I'd like to think that there were some people who might have been interested in the concept, who did check the game out and maybe played it until they couldn't enjoy the difficulty anymore, and then maybe gave up, or maybe went and beat that final level and said that, okay, that's enough for me. I like the
Yeah.
game. It was like the rest of the game is too difficult for my interests, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. When years and years and years ago, when John Blow was first working on The Witness, we had a very similar discussion about, there was maybe 3 or 4 puzzles in, was really difficult. It was really hard. And I said, why put this giant flag up that says you're not smart enough to play my game? And his response was essentially like, if you can't get past this, you're never going to finish it, right? And I was like, yeah, but I mean, like, why not? And so this idea of, I don't want to have to be as smart as everyone who finishes the game. I just want to be smart enough to see something cool. And then that's okay for me, right? Like, I don't want to feel judged. And I think that this is a really interesting thing, is especially as you look at content systems like Roblox, for example, where there's lots and lots of experiences. People experiment, they go in, they spend time with their friends, and then they move on. Like, it's really about giving them something unique and interesting to do. It's not necessarily about getting them to be the perfect player or giving them the best skill possible. And it's a very modern take on design. So I guess what I would love to ask you is, like, having made Baba's You and, having this career based on kind of game jamming and thinking about games as an experiment, What are you trying to look at now? Like what do you think are some things that are interesting to think about in terms of design now that you've done that?
Uh, Unfortunately, I think my answer will be kind of boring in a way because the uh, when I started working on Baba Is You, as I mentioned earlier, I had some ideas of like game projects that I had already in the works before Baba Is You came along. And when I started working on Baba Is You, I had so much fun working on Baba Is You that I kind of eventually just agreed with myself that, okay, I'll put all my other projects on hold. I'll just work on Baba Is You because this seems like it has the most potential out of these projects. And it's also like what I want to do. So I put my two main projects at the time, or two other main projects at the time, on hold, and I still haven't quite returned to either one of those. Partially because one of those is a very over ambitious thing to do with a game creation tool like Multimedia Fusion. Like I should just move on to something else if I want to make that one project, and the other because uh, during the time I worked on Baba Is You, I grew increasingly disappointed with my design decisions with this other game, which is
Ah,
like the sequel to my first commercial title that I made on my own, Environmental Station Alpha. So
yeah.
I'll refer to it as ESA. So
ESA,
ESA
yeah.
2, yeah. Like in 2015, when I released ESA 1, I immediately started working on the sequel. And the problem with immediately starting to work on something after you finish something else, like immediately starting a sequel, is that you can kind of run or like paint yourself into a corner, or kind of be too hasty with some decisions that you have to live with for the rest of the design process. Or you can, obviously you can also just kind of promise to people that, yeah, I will do this, and later regret the decision. So with ESA 2, I had made some design decisions that I regretted over time. And during Baba Is You's 2-year development cycle, I was increasingly disappointed with those design
I
decisions.
see.
And sorry?
I said, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when I started feeling that Baba Is You would be about done, or when I kind of started feeling that maybe I should start returning to ESA 2, uh, I actually felt that, okay, maybe it's better if I just restart the whole project from scratch, throw away 2 years of development, uh, the stuff I made between 2015 and 2017 before I started working on Baba Is You, and fix those design decisions instead of trying to kind of fulfill my promise to fans of ESA 1 and finish a game that I won't be happy with myself, just to kind of get it done. And I did just that. So one of the projects that I have in my, like, that I've kind of decided that I will keep working on is ESA 2, which in some ways, like, now that I've kind of made name for myself as the developer of Baba Is You, ESA 2 is kind of in a very different end of this kind of innovation, creativity spectrum of things, because
Yeah.
ESA 2 is like traditional Metroidvania. The main
I was going
character
to
is
say.
even colored. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
the main character looks like Samus Aran. The color scape is similar. It happens in space. It's like Metroid.
Yeah.
Uh, but it has its own things that I enjoy doing. So I'm not like, it's enjoyable to work on that project. Maybe not as enjoyable as it was before Baba Is You came along, because now I have this kind of urge to do something more experimental again. But I still like doing something pretty traditional. Also has its perks.
Yeah, there's something really nice about building something that's a love letter to a genre. I'm currently working on a project that's a love letter to sort of early GBA and DS games, which I really really loved especially as a student in college. I spent a lot of time grinding through large levels of quantity of puzzles and stuff, in
Yeah.
like games like Superstar Saga and the Ham
Oh yeah,
series.
Superstar
And,
Saga is amazing.
it's such a great game. And like, even Princess Peach and some of these other like games that I played on, cart-based games, where I would just grind and grind and grind and grind on these very basic mechanics. Like there's something about that I really love. And yeah, designing a game like that is not as hard as coming up with something completely experimental, like in VR, for example. But it has a quality of it's like nourishing in a way. And I don't know, maybe do you think there's like only so much experimental game juice in your head? Like, do you think that there's a limited quantity and you maybe needed a break from thinking about these really intense logic puzzles?
For me at least, coming up with experimental ideas is definitely something that requires a lot of time for ideas to kind of mature in my head. Even with Baba Is You, even though Baba Is You had kind of a unique process behind it, where the idea kind of came to me suddenly out of the blue as a combination of things, there was still a lot of kind of a history behind this concept with those puzzle games I had played, like inspiration from other puzzle games. And the puzzle design in Baba Is You has a lot of links to a lot of stuff that has happened to me or that I have played over the years. So for me, usually what I do is that I find ideas that I feel are interesting in some way, that I feel that, okay, I want to do something with this. Usually those ideas are overly ambitious or in some other ways like unfeasible to actually implement, but I still write them down or spend time kind of pondering them and being excited about them, even though I kind of know deep down that, okay, I will probably never do anything with this because this is just too large.
Too huge.
Yeah. But sometimes what happens is that those ideas kind of nurture other ideas, or I can combine ideas from different overly ambitious projects to create something new that might not be overly ambitious. So something with now that Baba Is You is not really actually done, I'm still making the level editor. I'm still making new levels that will be released sometime this year, hopefully.
Yay.
Yeah, it's like making a level editor for actual like users to use is it's painful.
It is,
but yeah,
I've done it.
I've committed myself to it. Yeah, it's terrifying, but yeah. But anyway, like now that Baba Is You is kind of done in some sense of the word, and it's been very successful, and it has won a lot of awards. I've been trying to kind of condition myself to remember that whatever I do next won't be as successful. I should not be in the situation where I feel that my next game has to be Baba Is You level of successful, or even Baba Is You level of experimental, or Baba Is You level of like I don't know, innovative, or whatever you want to use for that. So it's kind of I have these ideas I want to make. I want to be able to make those ideas, and I want to be the kind of person who doesn't worry if my next game is a flop or is a game that people say that it's neat, but I was expecting something better from the developer of Baba Is You. I absolutely won't be that person. I will absolutely feel bad about people dissing something I do next because it's not as good as Baba Is You, or comparing things I do next to Baba Is You. It's inevitable, but I'd like to kind of avoid that as much as I can.
Yeah, that's actually, I think it's a survival technique for any designer. If you make something that appeals to people on a broad scale, you've kind of struck gold in that the timing was good, the audience was ready, there wasn't anything else that came out that same month that was directly competing with it. There's so many things. I mean, think about all the people that were getting ready to launch big titles right when we were all told suddenly to go to lockdown and everyone had a panic attack. Or if you think you're going to do something and then suddenly a developer on your team gets really sick, or there's all kinds of things that happen in a game process. So when a game does really well, it's a miracle and it's great, but you can't expect to just have bottled lightning every time, right? And that's that is actually, I think it's a kindness to yourself, and it's a good thing to remind aspiring developers and, established developers alike, that not everything is going to be your first big game, and also not everything should be. As you mature, you get different things out of different projects that you work on. And I think, you've spoken to this before, but I think this idea of living your best life while being a developer is better than crunching for the idea of some kind of respect or fame or money or whatever, because then the life you're living day to day is not that great.
Yeah, I feel that. Well, obviously, I'm in like a super privileged position, not only because of Baba Is You, just like general. Like I shouldn't be talking about anything when it comes to like hardships about anything ever, because I just as a forward, and especially now that Baba Is You has been so successful, I like me giving advice to anyone like how to face hardships, or how to stand it when your game doesn't do well, or if your game is good but no one notices it, like how to react to that. No one should be asking me for advice on that, because I would be a terrible person to give that kind of advice. But I feel that for me, even before Baba Is You, when I was releasing ESA 1, I had this comforting idea or thought that nowadays there are so many people playing games that if I can be in a situation where I can get even a small audience for my game, like if I can get feedback from people and get a sense that some people are noticing my game, and some people are commenting on it, and some people are like noticing it in some way, then that's great. And my kind of utopian concept is that, because people have been talking so much about like the indie crash and how so many games get lost without anyone noticing it, I feel that like the one possibly overly naive compromise between every game getting the attention of everyone and only a couple of games getting the attention of everyone, and most games getting the attention of no one, there would be like there could be this world where when you release a game, unless it's like exceptionally well advertised, or you have exceptionally good connections, or you're exceptionally lucky, or it's just exceptionally good, you might still find a niche for yourself where you have like a moderate audience, where you can be successful on some level and get like the satisfaction of getting feedback for your game from players, even if it doesn't even if it's not like a major success.
Yeah,
And
I mean, this is kind of the idea of making a game as an art form, right? Like you make it, you get some feedback, people enjoy it, you've expressed something true to yourself, and then if they get something out of it, then that's art. That's a process, and you don't always make a lot of money doing that, but there's something fulfilling about it, right?
yeah, and I feel like the biggest shame in indie games right now are the situations where someone makes something that they actually are really proud of, that they actually spent a lot of time and effort on, that doesn't get any attention. Like the saddest situation is where someone like something actually gets lost in the void. That is something that I wish no one would have to experience. But the kind of situation where someone releases something and it gets some attention, that they can feel that, hey, I had in this subgroup of people, my game was maybe not even liked, but like just received, and it got the kind of critical response that people felt that it deserved. Okay, well, that's badly said. I don't want anyone to get like trolled or get like angry messages. Just kind of like just getting even a small subgroup of people as your audience is already, especially for like an aspiring new developer, something to strive for. And what I'm hoping for is that when I make my next game, maybe, I don't know, depending on circumstances, maybe it takes me so long to make a new game that everyone has already forgotten Baba Is You. Maybe I will get those like angry messages that, hey, this is not Baba Is You 2, what are you doing? But what I'm kind of hoping for, that even if my next game won't be as successful as Baba Is You, and it won't win maybe any awards at all, or it, like, I don't know, it's not successful, I can still be in the situation where it gets that like small niche group of people who actually pay attention to it and give me feedback, because that is kind of the base level that is required for me to feel that, hey, making this thing was actually worthwhile in some sense.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I really appreciate you taking this hour to talk to us. And of course, you should check out Baba Is You. It's amazing. It's fun. It is whimsical, and there are moments of really true genius in the level designs. And you don't have to play all puzzles to feel smart. I can tell you that as a person who has played it myself. Thank you so much, Arvi, for your time. We really, really appreciate it, and we wish you well. Stay safe, stay inside, and keep making great games.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here, and absolutely the same to you. Like, stay healthy, take care, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.